Yo, yo, welcome back. It's Bromula One. I'm Caleb,
I'm Ryan.
I'm Steven.
and we are bringing you everything from the pit lane to the podcast. Woohoo.
You. That's right.
Yeah.
We're chill, we're relaxed, we accept everyone, we're all inclusive, and that includes you, Max Verstappen fans. We have one
Oh,
among us,
burn.
Everyone's got to
Today-
have one.
right? They're everywhere. I myself am also slightly a Max Verstappen fan. He's a great driver. How can you hate him? Anyway,
I'm feeling a little outnumbered here. Slightly.
Lewis is great too.
Hey, the podium has 3 spots, all right? It can't all be one driver.
Lando.
Alonso.
Well, it's summer break and we have a lot to discuss. I mean, Formula One isn't just races, even though that's when everything kind of comes together to a peak. We're here to talk race strategy. And we're also going to give you some brodictions again for the Dutch GP coming up next week. Boys, how excited are we to be back in race weekend?
Woo! I'm pumped.
Man.
I'm excited to see those orange flags, those orange flares. I think I might eat, drink an orange soda. Let's just get into it.
It's the Max Verstappen 2023 Grand Prix.
It is, yeah. I feel like there have been way more Max Verstappen home races this year. I mean, you got Belgium, you got Hungary, you got Dutch GP. There's just the orange flares everywhere.
Oh, come on. There's 2 drivers for Red Bull. Hungary's could be the Checo Perez home Grand Prix. Who knows?
I thought all these
Don't the
orange...
flags share colors? Hungary and Mexico. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
No, the joke is lost.
Well, cool.
Let's
We're
jump
gonna talk
into
race
strategy then. All right. All right. So, strategy 101, other than just make the car go faster, we want to talk about the decisions that the teams have at their disposal during the race, before the race, and sometimes after the race of what they can do to impact their car, how to get it across that line before their competitors. So what I like to do is I kind of like to shape every Grand Prix as like a weekend in and of itself. It's fully encapsulated because a lot of the differences are going to be track specific. So one decision you make at Monza is going to be completely different than one you make at Monaco. A tale of 2 Mons, if you will. So yeah, like right off the bat, teams jump into free practice 1, free practice 2 on a Friday. And what types of things are they looking to gather, Ryan, in those sessions?
Well, like you said, track specific. You've got Monza is very different from Monaco. It's got super long straights, high top speed. You don't need a lot of downforce because there aren't that many corners to keep, you don't need to keep the cars planted in some of those low and mid speed corners like you do in Monaco. So Monaco, they're running high downforce setup, Monza, low downforce setup. And ultimately, like you said, they're trying to figure out the fastest way around the track. So each team, right, is trying to figure out, where do we prioritize speed? Do we want faster speed in the corners, the straights? That's a very simplified version of it, but they also want to get a feel for grip, for tires, how the tires wear, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's a good point. As we know in Formula One, downforce is king. We want as much grip possible, so that you can be faster out of those corners, quicker onto the gas, more reliability with their braking zone, so they can brake later into that braking zone. We hear the terms out braking your opponents to create an overtake. A lot of times that allows a faster car to go on the outside instead of diving in the inside. So track position is determined by what, Caleb?
It's determined by qualifying in your order, in your qualifying result. Correct? That's what you're looking for?
Absolutely. So give us
quiz,
a
I love it.
breakdown. Yeah, give us a breakdown on qualifying format. You got 20 teams to start, and ultimately,
Yeah.
how do you take us to lights out and away we go?
Yeah. So qualifying, depending on the weekend, qualifying can be more exciting and thrilling than the race itself. And so unlike other sports, like in football, where you got the one game and that's what you watch, in Formula One, you got a whole weekend, like you said, Steven. And qualifying is the summation of all the data that you've gathered in free practice. You've usually had 3 at this point, and if it's a sprint weekend, that's an exception. We can talk about that later. But it's a summation of all of the data that you've gathered, and you put this package together to give you 1 lap of just pure speed. And so you got 3 sessions in qualifying. You got Q3, Q2, or Q1, Q2, Q3, sorry, in that order. And you start with all 20 cars on the grid. You got, what is it, 16 minutes in Q1?
I think
Or is
it's
it
20 minutes
20,
in Q1,
20,
yeah.
16, 12? Does it go down like that?
The timings aren't
Timings aren't that important, but you got all 20 cars vying for the opportunity to throw down the fastest lap. And if you are bottom 5 in Q1, 5 slowest laps, you are out. You don't advance to Q2. And the same thing applies to Q2, bottom 5, you're out. And so in Q3, we have 10 drivers left. And the time is a little bit shorter in Q3 as well. And they all are vying for trying to get their fastest lap. And there's something called track evolution as well that we kind of touched on earlier, where the track warms up with all of these cars going around and around and around and around, which increases the time of each driver's lap who follows the other driver by sometimes a few tenths of a second. I mean, it's incredible. The laps that we see at the beginning of, you're at the end of even Q1 to the end of Q3, sometimes there's a few seconds difference and they're on the same tire. So qualifying is just a summation of all that data.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's a good summary. Other things that impact track evolution might be, rubbering in. We hear that a lot. So as these cars go fast through the corners, their tires degrade, that rubber stays on the track, right? Ryan was talking about the differences of tires. So we've got, how do you determine which tires to use in a qualifying session, Ryan?
Well, first off, I guess, is it the FIA that determines, or Formula One itself determines, which of the 5 compounds are being used in a weekend?
Pirelli.
Pirelli determines that. Okay. I
Who's
didn't know
Pirelli?
that. Pirelli's a tire manufacturer, Italian. So do you think they have a favorite team for Ferrari, maybe? I don't know.
Ooh, might be Mercedes, depending on who you ask. A couple of years ago, some fancy testing. Yeah.
yeah, you never know. True, that's been in the news lately. But you do have 3 compounds to choose from: the soft, the medium, and the hard. They've made that easy on us in recent years. It used to be super softs and ultra softs and all this different stuff. So think of it like, obviously the harder tire is harder. It's going to take longer to warm up, and it's not going to be as sticky and as grippy. The soft tire is not as hard. It's a little more pliable, and it's going to give you more grip, and it's going to be a little bit quicker to heat up. Medium tire is somewhere in the middle. So in qualifying, unless it's raining, you're going to be using a slick tire. And very rarely do we see people coming out on the hard tire. I mean, it's almost never happens. Occasionally, you will see people starting on the medium tire, especially if you're a top tier team, you're faster, like a Red Bull, Ferrari, Aston Martin. Doesn't hurt to start Q1 on a medium tire because you've got the pace in hand. You have that gap over the rest of the field, and you can conserve those soft tires. But Q3 showdown, top 10 drivers, everybody's using softs.
That's where the excitement happens. As Caleb was pointing out, there can be so many huge dramatic moments that happen in qualifying because it's a put up or shut up moment. You got 1 lap, you're the last person on track, and your rival just threw down a banger. What are you gonna do? And it's pretty cool because in some tracks like Monaco, where the risk to reward is so much higher, if you bin it, that could potentially put you out of the race. And
what does it mean to bin it, Steven?
Oh, you can crash right into
viewers?
those freaking walls, man.
Put it in the trash bin.
Put the whole car right into it.
Gone.
Yeah.
But
go ahead.
But sometimes we've seen in Monaco that sometimes you benefit from binning it, don't you?
Slight bumps.
Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc, sometimes crashing can help you.
Yeah, except for when it ruins your gearbox and then you're out of the race.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But sometimes when you have those little crashes, you take off your front tire, your team has to repair that car by race day the next day. Am I wrong?
No,
No, that's right.
you're
Yeah.
wrong.
And that's
And
one thing that's so exciting about Formula One too, is the engineering aspect of Formula One. And that's a huge part of race strategy that we're going to dive into here.
yeah, perfect. So we've kind of got an idea of a couple of the different tire options that teams can make. We got the soft ones. They're going to degrade a little bit more, as Ryan was saying. That material is just going to flake away a little bit more. You're going to have more graining. And so it's not going to maintain that pace for as long as you would, presumably hope. Your soft tires are going to last anywhere from 10 to 20 laps. Your mediums are a little bit longer, 20 to 30 laps. And then obviously your hards, while there are the slower tire, you're going to have to, change them out a little bit less. Also to note, I'll just do a little side note here. Teams are allocated a certain number of tires for the weekend. So that includes their practice sessions, that includes the race, qualifying, etc. So you can't just throw on softs, brand new softs every time you change tires. You have to be a little bit more tactical about which tires you're using. You want to get some data on both the hards and the mediums as well. So there's a lot to think about when you come in for the pits, which tires you're going to throw on. So let's get into the race then. The race starts, but before the race starts, you have to choose which tire you're starting on, right? There is a sporting regulation. There's two governing things that kind of govern Formula One. That's technical regulations and sporting regulations. The things that govern the race day are the sporting regs. Technical regs are kind of like the size of the cars, types of fuel you can use, etc. We're not going to dive too much into that on this segment, but as of sporting regulations, if the track is deemed dry, meaning there's not downpour coming and whatnot, each team is required to make at least one pit stop, and they're also required to have at least two different compounds run on that car during the race. There have been some interesting results as to some wet races that you don't have to, necessarily make a pit stop, right? Can you guys think of any races that's happened?
Oof. I think not that I can remember. Even with wet races, you're still sometimes the rain lets up and you're switching from full wet tires to intermediate wet tires, or vice versa. And even the wets and the intermediates do wear, and you have to replace those. So the only thing I can remember is Spa was that last year, where we did 2 laps behind the safety car, and that was the race. So
Oh yeah,
that's the only one I can think
yep.
of.
2021, yeah.
Yeah, 2021, yeah. Good.
I think there was a race that I think it was one of the Alpines, either Ocon or Alonso, that did the entire race on intermediates. And
That's bonkers.
I think it may have been Turkey 21. I'll have to check that, but
Yeah.
I wasn't aware that even occurred. I'm fairly newer to Formula One, so hearing about that is really fun.
yeah, it's kind of interesting. So we're back into the race. We have strategy, and we know that the differences between downforce and low drag and whatnot. How do you know when to make your pit stop? We'll go with Caleb first.
Oh man, I think it's so interesting. There are so many factors that influence a team's decision for when to pit, and a lot of it has to do with where their teammate is and when their competitors or the people in front or behind, the people that they're racing this weekend, pit as well. I think you hear a phrase, going for the undercut, happen a lot when pit stopping. So they're, say for example, Hamilton's at 3, Charles is at 2, and they both are on a similarly aged tire. Hamilton will try and pit earlier, throw down a banger of a lap, and Charles will then have to pit because Hamilton's gaining and gapping him. And then when Charles pits, he's hoping that he can still end up in front of Hamilton. And so, Charles will then, if Ferrari doesn't make a stupid
Bin the strategy.
mistake, bin the strategy, will probably most likely pit that very next lap in hopes that Hamilton will not cut him off. So I mean, there are so many. I don't know. That's as far as I'm aware. That's the biggest factor. Really, is just who's in front of you, behind you, what are they doing, what tires are they running? Is there a
Mhm.
safety car? Yeah.
All right, Ryan.
Yeah.
What do you think? When do you make your pit stop?
Again, like Caleb said, it depends. So, what tire did we start on? Did we start on the hard tire? Are we going to go for a long first stint and stay out later? Is it a track that is more prone to safety cars? Because if it is, then I might throw on a medium or a hard to start, try to push hard. And then if that safety car comes out, you get a bonus where you save time on your pit stop. So it really just depends. Like he said, you've got your teammate strategy. There is the guy in front of you, the guy behind you. So who you're attacking or defending from. You're also looking at timing sheets. So it's always interesting to me when somebody in the back pits early and you're like, oh, they went for a surprise tire choice that I wasn't thinking. You know that all eyes are on that guy and on his sector times to see, like, is this the advantageous route to go? Is this the faster tire right now? So a lot of
Yeah.
factors that go into it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we obviously speculate. We don't have all the data that these teams have, but we do know certain concepts like fuel load. So the cars start at their heaviest at the very beginning of the race. As that fuel comes down, the cars get faster and faster. You're going to be less harsh on your tires. So the benefit from having maybe a softer compound later on in the race is going to be that much better with a lighter fuel load. That's why you see a lot of times the last 2 or 3 laps of the race end up being the ones that are awarded for the fastest lap. Fastest lap is still worth a point in the championship. So those are valuable points. The Grand Prix allots points just for the top 10 finishers. So if you're within that top 10 and you snag fastest lap, you could potentially double your points if you're
Right.
running in 10th place. So for me, I think it's interesting to see how quickly that first stint, you see degradation, you see potential graining. And so let's talk about Ryan. You talked about a little bit. You mentioned a little bit the person you're racing against in front of you. You want to try to make that overtake, right? So there are 2 common strategies that we've heard of. Caleb, you talked about the undercut. There's also what's called the overcut. And as we explain this, keep in mind we're looking at the perspective of the driver in behind, right? The second place driver in this situation. An undercut is when the second place driver pits first, and they're trying to make that fastest out lap as they can, and just really put the hurt on those tires as they're ending their stint, jump into the pit stop, have a great out lap, and then they can kind of catch the front car off guard a little bit. The overcut, however, is the opposite of that. You're waiting in second place until that first person pits first. At that point, you get the free clean air, and you're hoping that you have more pace in the car so that you can extend that stint a little bit longer. You guys have any examples of undercuts or overcuts or interesting strategy playouts?
None that come to mind, but I do think the overcut is harder to pull off because if you're trying to make your tires last longer and your rival ahead of you pits for fresh new rubber, that new rubber is theoretically going to be faster. So I don't see that working out as often as the undercut. I know it sometimes one track or another is more uh, benefited by one strategy or the other. What makes that so? I'm honestly too stupid to know, but I do.
Aren't we all?
If
Right.
it were me and I'm in second place, I'm gonna undercut all day. I think that's the way to go. Pit early, pressure P1 into making a decision, and then just ripping those brand new tires out the gate to get them to temperature and try to beat him out when he comes out the pit lane.
Oh yeah. And that overcut strategy can be, like Ryan said, I think it is harder to pull off, but it can be majorly beneficial, especially if you last for another 4 or 5 laps, because I think you don't really notice a difference in tire when it's the same compound when they're about just a few laps age difference, but when they're 5 laps different near the end of that stint, there's a huge difference in pace. And so if that overcut can just extend for 3, 4, 5 laps of just
Mhm.
shredding those tires and hopefully maintain the grip.
Ooh,
I think that overcut is just, I mean, that's just so much harder to
Yeah.
do. Steven, do you have examples? Ryan, are you going to say something?
That's
uh,
that's a good point about really extending that tire advantage and then pushing it to later on in the race
right.
when it's
Yeah.
most important. Because we'd mentioned fuel loads. You really want to hit and be approaching your rival, the person you want to overtake, with the best tires in the best window possible, with the least amount of fuel, so that you have that speed advantage, that speed differential to make that overtake stick.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's interesting point, Caleb, to say, okay, I'm gonna suffer, maybe I'm gonna push last another 5, 6, 7 laps, then um come in pit later, and then towards the end of the race, when, like you said, Stephen, the fuel loads are lighter, you've got a little bit fresher tires. That could be all the advantage you need. That's a good point.
One example I do want to kind of bring up is differences in how many pit stops you make. So
Mhm.
we hear a lot of like 1 stop, 2 stop, 3 stop. And there have been some really crazy examples throughout the life of Formula One, back when refueling was still in the sport,
They'd
or
hop out of the car and talk to their crew chief, say, hey, man, what are you seeing out there?
have
Like in the old days.
smoke a drag, like there plenty of weird stuff happened back then, but thankfully pit stops are down to 3 seconds or less at this point. And if you're not under that 3 seconds, you're not even competitive. Yeah, time is king, obviously. So
I've got every team's average pit stop time for this season. And now I think taking in every single team's average pit stop time can be a little bit skewed, especially for teams that have broken wings, or, those pit stops take longer. But there are only, I believe it's only 3 teams below the 3-second average pit stop time. And when it comes to Formula One, each second matters so much. That 1 second that you waste in the pit could be your rival coming up behind you and passing you the very last lap of the race, and you dropping out of the points, or you dropping just a few points, or even losing the race. So, what are you guys' predictions for who those top 3 are?
I
The
think
top 3.
obviously Red Bull is for sure up there.
Yep.
They're the gold
Ferrari and
standard.
McLaren, I think.
I think
Okay.
McLaren, but I'm gonna maybe not go with Ferrari.
All right. You guys got to remember, McLaren at the beginning of the season had, I think it was the first 2 races where their car was a tractor, and I pitted, I think, like 5 times with Lando, and they were like,
So they got good practice.
yeah. Well, Red Bull is 1 at 2.6 is their average pit time. Incredible, right?
What?
Believe it or not, Ferrari 2.7, right
Woo-woo.
behind them.
Okay.
And then Aston Martin is number 3 at 2.98.
I was gonna guess Aston Martin.
Yeah. And then McLaren's 3.02, Mercedes 3.05, Tari 3.22, Alpine 3.32, and in dead last, Alfa Romeo 3.85. That is
Yikes.
1.2 seconds average pit stop being lost to Red Bull.
That's just too much time when in a sport where we are fighting over thousands, and you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get a couple tenths improvements over your cars. This is just unacceptable to be that
All right.
slow.
I will fight back on that just a little bit, because if you're AlphaTauri and you're already losing a second to the cars ahead per lap, so what is a second going to save you on a pit stop if you're doing 1 or 2 pit stops a race? They have other priorities, I think, to focus on. They're just like, get the car in, get the job done, get it out. If we're slower, that's fine. And I think, honestly, that's Mercedes' strategy too, is they're not aiming for speed. They're actually, one of the slower teams when it comes to pit stops, or maybe midfield,
Yeah.
but they're consistent and they get it right.
But I'm going to push back on that, because why can't you improve both of those things in parallel? If I'm a member of the pit crew, I'm not necessarily designing the CFD or in the wind tunnel, resurfacing everything. I just need to be the best that I can of pulling that tire off and putting it back on.
How
Right?
often have we seen teams lose races, though, due to a malfunctioning pit stop. I remember, was it 2016? Haas in Australia, week one, both
Oof.
their cars, they put on the tire and that wasn't all the way screwed on. They both retired and they were going to have 2 cars in the top 10. Danny Rick,
Yep.
Monaco, when was that? 2017, 2016?
2018, I think.
28.
Yeah.
I think he won 2018, but he had a failed pit stop the year before.
Right.
And
Jeez.
in Monaco, it is all about track position. You can't pass. I mean, you rarely see a pass in Monaco. So these pit stops can be very important, but there's a risk to reward. You know, do you just want to go for efficiency, or do you want to risk it and, you know, exit in front of your opponent, or risk a DNF?
Right. Well, it's good that we touched on strategy. Let's wrap it up, and then we'll
Becky.
tease a little bit next episode. We're going to talk about our predictions for the Dutch Grand Prix coming up.
Predictions. Woo-woo.
Predictions, absolutely.
Bro position.
We'll see you guys
Did you
there.
say brole position?
Bro position. We got the bro position or the pole shitter. Which one do you want to call it?